Three bounty hunters demand 10-year-old Sage Freeman choose between betraying her Comanche protector for an education or facing life imprisonment as his accomplice. The blind black girl was abandoned by a wagon train and left crying alone on the Kansas prairie until Ayanna, an exiled warrior, whispered the words that saved her life. Now she clutches his father's medicine stone while federal marshals close in, forcing her to decide between loyalty and survival. Sage Freeman would discover that choosing between civilization and family means choosing between two different kinds of blindness. Sage Freeman crouched in the tall grass, her small hands pressed flat against the Kansas earth. The vibrations told her everything. 3 horses, moving fast, getting closer. Ayanna knelt beside her, his breathing shallow from the fresh wound in his shoulder. Blood had dried on his buckskin shirt, dark against the weathered leather. He placed something cold in her palm. His father's medicine stone. "They want me to choose," Sage whispered. Her blind eyes stared at nothing, but her fingers traced the crumpled wanted poster in her other hand. $500, dead or alive. The bounty hunters called out across the prairie. Their voices carried on the wind like threats. "Girl, we know you're there. Hand over the Indian, and nobody gets hurt." Ayanna's calloused hand covered hers. He spoke in the mix of English and Comanche that had become their private language. "Little sister, you choose your path, I choose mine." The horses were getting closer. Sage could feel their hoofbeats through the ground, counting the seconds until she had to decide. Betray the only family she had ever known for a chance at the civilized life everyone said she deserved, or sacrificed everything for loyalty to someone society called her enemy. The wind shifted. She smelled dust and leather and the metal of drawn weapons. 3 months earlier, the choice had been simpler. Outside Fort Larned, wagon master Samuel Morrison counted coins in his weathered palm. The math was brutal. Water for 23 people. Food for 18 days. One blind girl who asked too many questions about parents she would never see again. "She's become a burden," Morrison told his wife. "We can't afford to feed dead weight all the way to California." Sage sat on a wooden crate beside their wagon, listening to every whispered word. Her fingers worked at the frayed edge of her only dress. The fabric had belonged to someone else once. Everything she owned had belonged to someone else first. Mrs. Morrison approached with a cloth bundle. "Hardtack and jerky. Enough for maybe 2 days. Someone will come along, child. The fort's not far. You'll be fine." The wagon wheels creaked as they rolled away. Sage counted the sounds until they faded into silence. Then she sat alone with her bundle of food and waited for someone to come. Nobody came. The first day, she rationed the water, sipped it slow, and tried not to think about the vastness stretching in every direction. The second day, she finished the food and started walking toward what she hoped was the fort. Her bare feet found rocks and prairie dog holes and nothing that felt like salvation. By the third day, she had stopped walking. Ayanna found her collapsed beside a dry creek bed. He had been tracking his stolen horse, following prints that led from the Morrison camp toward the territorial boundaries. The horse thieves had taken more than his mount. They had taken his connection to home. He saw the small figure from a distance, a child, motionless in the grass. The spirits had placed a test in his path. Every instinct told him to keep riding. He was already an exile from his own people. Caring for a lost white child would only bring more trouble. But something in her stillness reminded him of his father's teachings about mercy. He dismounted and approached carefully. The girl's breathing was shallow. Her lips were cracked from thirst. When he touched her shoulder, she flinched and tried to crawl away. "Are you going to scalp me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Fear radiated from her like heat from sun-baked stone. Ayanna understood the fear even if he could not understand all her words. The stories white people told their children about his people had poisoned the well of trust before he ever arrived. He offered her his water gourd instead of words. She hesitated, then drank deeply. "What's your name?" she asked after she had finished drinking. He told her in Comanche. She repeated it back, her pronunciation clumsy but earnest. He pointed to himself and said it again. Then he pointed to her and waited. "Sage." He nodded and repeated her name, the first word of their shared language. They walked together as the sun began to set. Ayanna led his horse while Sage learned to read the ground through her feet. She stumbled often, but each time she fell, she got back up without complaint. That night, he built a small fire and shared his dried meat. She sat across from him, her blind eyes reflecting the flames. "Why did they leave you?" She spoke slowly, choosing words he might understand. He caught enough to know she had been abandoned, cast out, made into an exile just as he had been. When she asked about his people, he pointed toward the distant mountains. His voice carried the same loneliness she had heard in her own words, the same weight of being unwanted. They were both orphans now, both strangers in a land that had no place for them. As she fell asleep beside the dying fire, Sage made her choice. She would trust this warrior who had given her water when she was dying. She would learn his language and let him teach her how to survive. She did not know yet that this choice would lead to another, that 3 months later, she would hold his father's medicine stone in one hand and his death warrant in the other. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of approaching horses. In the distance, the bounty hunters were closing in. Weeks passed like water through cupped hands. Ayana taught Sage to read the world through everything but sight. The crunch of different grasses under bare feet. The way wind changed pitch when it had rocked instead of open prairie. How bird calls shifted when strangers approached their territory. She learned to map their path through sound and scent. Oak trees smelled different from cottonwoods. Creek water had its own voice, different from wind through wheatgrass. Her world expanded beyond the reach of her fingertips. Rock, she said in careful Comanche, touching a sun-warmed boulder. Stone, Ayana replied in his broken English, then repeated the word in his own language. Their private vocabulary grew daily, part English, part Comanche, part gesture. A language that belonged only to them, born from necessity and trust. Sage learned that Ayana moved differently than other men she had known. His steps were deliberate, economical. He never wasted motion or made unnecessary noise. When he walked, he became part of the landscape instead of fighting against it. She began to understand why the prairie did not feel empty to him the way it had felt to her. Every plant had a purpose. Every animal track told a story. The land spoke if you knew how to listen. One morning, they heard voices carried on the wind. A family in distress. Broken wagon wheel, crying baby, the desperate edge that came with being lost in country that could kill you. Ayana prepared to leave food and slip away unseen. This was his way. Help without being seen. Mercy without acknowledgement. But Sage made a different choice. "Hello," she called out across the grass. "Are you lost?" The Hendricks family emerged from behind their crippled wagon. Father, mother, 2 small children. Their relief at seeing another human being turned to fear when they spotted Ayana. Mr. Hendricks reached for his rifle. The metal sang as he pulled it from its scabbard. Sage stepped between them. Her small body cast no shadow, but her presence shifted something in the air. "He's with me. He saved my life." The words humming the space between trust and terror. Mrs. Hendricks clutched her baby closer. The older child hid behind his father's legs. Ayana worked on their wheel without speaking. His hands knew wood and metal and the physics of weight and leverage. The repair took an hour. He left extra supplies in their wagon bed when they were not looking. As the family prepared to leave, Sage overheard Mrs. Hendricks whisper to her husband, "That savage has that poor blind girl under some kind of spell." The words cut deeper than intended. Sage felt Ayana stiffen beside her, though he gave no other sign that he had understood. After the wagon disappeared over the next ridge, they walked in silence. The encounter had changed something between them, made their partnership visible to the outside world in a way that felt dangerous. That evening, Sage followed Ayana to a hidden cache. Supplies tucked beneath an overhang of rock. Food, blankets, medicine. Enough to keep a stranded family alive for days. She realized this was not the first cache. Throughout their travels, he had been leaving provisions along the trail routes. Not raiding, providing. "Why?" she asked. Ayana sat heavily on a fallen log. His face carried the weight of old grief. Through gestures and broken words, he told her about his father, a peace chief who had believed in helping all people, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. Father dead. White flag. He mimed the motion of surrender, then the sharp crack of a rifle shot. The story came in fragments, a treaty meeting that had ended in betrayal. A man of peace shot down while trying to build bridges between worlds that seemed determined to burn them. They say father weak, peace weak, I weak. Sage understood then why he had been cast out from his own people. His mercy was seen as betrayal of tribal justice. His father's compassion had been interpreted as collaboration with the enemy. She reached for his hand. Her fingers found scars on his knuckles, old wounds that had healed crooked. "You're not weak," she said. "You saved me." That night, she lay awake listening to the prairies settle into darkness. Ayana's breathing was steady beside the dying fire, but she sensed he was not sleeping either. She had begun to piece together the truth about the savage raids the wagon trains whispered about. The missing supplies that were never really stolen. The mysterious appearance of food and medicine, where desperate travelers could find them. The monster in their stories was actually an angel moving through the darkness, carrying on his father's work of mercy. But her questions had consequences she had not foreseen. The next morning brought the sound of distant hoofbeats, riders moving with purpose across the grassland. The first bounty hunters had found their trail. Ayanna broke camp with practiced efficiency. He saddled his horse and lifted Sage behind him, without wasting words on explanations. They rode hard toward the territorial boundaries, where the law became more suggestion than certainty. Behind them, the riders followed, patient as wolves, persistent as guilt. As they crested a low hill, Sage looked back toward the sound of pursuit. She could not see their faces, but she could hear their determination in the rhythm of their horses. "Why they hunt you?" she asked. Ayanna's answer was barely audible over the wind. "Because they do not know the difference between justice and revenge." They rode toward the setting sun, two exiles fleeing toward a horizon that promised nothing but more running. Sage pressed her face against Ayanna's back and felt the steady beat of his heart. She had chosen to trust him. Now she would learn the price of that choice. The hoofbeats behind them grew closer. Marshal Jonas Wheeler tracked them like a scholar studying a text. No wasted motion, no amateur mistakes. His horse moved with the patience of a predator that knew its prey would eventually tire. He was different from the other bounty hunters, clean-shaven, well-dressed. He spoke of justice and civilization, as though they were holy words that could sanctify any action taken in their name. When he cornered them at an abandoned homestead, his approach surprised Sage. No shouting, no drawn weapons, just the quiet confidence of a man who had never doubted his own righteousness. "Child, I'm here to rescue you from this savage's influence." His voice carried the warmth of a father speaking to a lost daughter. Sage felt Ayanna tense beside her, but he made no move toward his knife. Wheeler dismounted slowly, his hands visible and empty. He pulled a leather portfolio from his saddlebags and approached them like a teacher preparing to deliver an important lesson. "My name is Marshal Jonas Wheeler. I've been authorized by the territorial government to bring you to safety." The portfolio contained official papers, documents with seals and signatures that meant nothing to Sage but everything to the law. Wheeler spread them on the ground between them like a peace offering. "There's a school, child, the Carlisle Institute. They want exceptional students. Your survival story, your quick learning, your resilience. You could have a full scholarship." The words hit Sage like physical blows. Education, books, a future that extended beyond mere survival. Everything she had dreamed of during the long nights beside dying campfires. "All you need to do is tell the truth. This Indian took you against your will, didn't he? Technically, that's kidnapping." Wheeler's logic was flawless. Ayanna had taken her from where the wagon train had left her. The fact that she would have died without his intervention was legally irrelevant. Sage's fingers found the medicine stone in her pocket. The smooth surface had worn warm against her palm over the weeks of carrying it. Ayanna had given it to her after she had learned to navigate by starlight, when she had proven she could survive in his world. "I knew your parents, Sage." The words stopped her breathing. Wheeler smiled at her reaction, the satisfied expression of a man playing his strongest card. "Before the war, they belonged to me, fine people. Your mother could read, which was rare for her kind. I always intended to educate their children properly." The kindness in his voice could not mask the possession underneath. Wheeler did not see Sage as a person to help. She was property that had wandered away from its rightful owner. "They were sold before you were born. Unfortunate. But business is business. I've always wondered what became of their daughter." Sage felt the ground shifting beneath her feet, not just the physical earth, but the foundation of everything she thought she understood about choice and freedom. "Refuse my offer, and you'll be branded as his accomplice. Work farms aren't kind to blind-colored girls. This is your only chance at the life you deserve." Wheeler gathered his papers with practiced efficiency. The conversation was over. The terms had been stated. All that remained was her decision. "I'll give you until morning to think it over. Pray on it, child. Ask the Lord to show you the path to redemption." He made camp 50 yards away, close enough to prevent escape but far enough to maintain the illusion that Sage had a choice in the matter. That night, Ayanna sat beside the fire without speaking. His silence carried more weight than any words could have borne. Sage knew he understood more English than he had ever revealed. He had heard every word of Wheeler's proposition. "You could run," she said finally. He shook his head, not because escape was impossible, but because abandoning her was unthinkable. "Tomorrow you choose, I understand." His acceptance cut deeper than anger would have. He was prepared to die for her decision, whatever form it took. Sage lay awake listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Coyotes calling across the darkness, wind through dry grass, the soft breathing of a man who had sacrificed everything to keep her alive. Near midnight, she heard voices from Wheeler's camp. His men were planning the next day's events with military precision. Soon as the girl gives testimony, we take care of the Indian problem permanently. What if she refuses to cooperate? Then we take care of both problems. The choice Wheeler had offered was no choice at all. Ayanna would die regardless of her decision. The only question was whether she would survive to benefit from his sacrifice. Sage rose quietly and walked to where Ayanna kept watch. He handed her his father's medicine stone without being asked. "Little brother told me once," he said in his careful English, "that the strongest choice is the one that saves others, even when it costs everything." She closed her fingers around the stone. The surface was still warm from his touch. "Your father was wise. My father was murdered for his wisdom." They sat together in the darkness, two outcasts facing the dawn that would demand a decision neither of them wanted to make. In the distance, Wheeler's fire burned low. His men slept the easy sleep of those who had never questioned whether their cause was just. Sage thought about the Carlisle Institute, books and learning and a future that stretched beyond the horizon. Then she thought about Ayanna teaching her to read bird calls and wind patterns. Two different kinds of education, two different definitions of civilization. The medicine stone pulsed warm against her palm like a living heart. Morning was coming, and with it the moment when she would have to choose between salvation and loyalty, between the life she had been promised and the life she had lived. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of distant rain. Dawn broke like a wound across the prairie sky. Sage crouched in the tall grass, feeling the vibrations of approaching horses through the earth. 3 riders, moving with the certainty of men who had never been denied what they wanted. Ayanna knelt beside her, blood dried dark on his shoulder from the previous night's struggle. Wheeler's men had tried to end the conversation before it began. Only Ayanna's vigilance had kept them both breathing until sunrise. The medicine stone lay warm in Sage's palm. In her other hand, the crumpled wanted poster. $500 for the warrior who had saved her life. "Girl," Wheeler's voice carried across the grassland. "We know you're there. Hand over the Indian, and nobody gets hurt." Ayanna placed his skirt hand over hers. His touch was gentle despite the calluses earned from a lifetime of survival. "Little sister, you choose your path, I choose mine." The horses grew closer. Sage could smell dust and leather, and the metal of drawn weapons. In that moment, she understood the true weight of choice. Not the illusion Wheeler had offered, but the real decision that would define who she became. She stood slowly, her blind eyes fixed on nothing and everything. "I'll come with you," she called out. "But Ayanna goes free. I have information about the real raids." Wheeler's laughter carried on the wind like the call of a carrion bird. "Child, you're in no position to negotiate. The supply thefts," Sage continued, her voice growing stronger. "The missing food and medicine from the wagon trains. You want to know who's really responsible?" She pointed toward Wheeler with the absolute certainty of someone who had learned to navigate by truth instead of sight. "He's standing right there." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Wheeler's men shifted uneasily in their saddles. Doubt crept into their voices when they spoke. Sage pulled evidence from her pocket. Boot prints pressed into wax. Supply manifests that did not match reported losses. Details she had gathered during the long nights of listening to Wheeler's men plan their deceptions. "You've been staging the raids to justify military contracts, taking supplies and blaming it on Indians, selling fear to people who trusted you to keep them safe." Wheeler's mask slipped. The paternal kindness disappeared, replaced by something cold and hungry. "You have no proof." The word of a blind-colored girl against a federal marshal. "I have witnesses. The Hendricks family, the Morrison wagon train, people who saw your men at the raid sites wearing war paint and feathers." Wheeler drew his weapon. The game of civilization was over. Only violence remained. Ayanna moved faster than thought. He threw himself between Wheeler and Sage as the shot echoed across the prairie. The bullet found flesh instead of empty air. The confrontation ended quickly after that. Wheeler's men, faced with evidence of their commander's corruption, chose survival over loyalty. They bound Wheeler's hands while he cursed their cowardice and promised revenge that would never come. Ayanna lay in the grass, his breathing shallow. The wound was beyond the reach of prairie medicine or warrior's will. Sage knelt beside him and took his weathered hand in both of hers. "You were never alone, little sister. Never." His English was perfect, unbroken. Every stumbled word, Every mispronounced phrase had been protection. He had understood every conversation, every threat, every moment of casual cruelty directed at both of them. Sage realized the depth of his sacrifice. He could have escaped alone countless times, could have left her to face the consequences of choices that were never really hers to make. "Why?" she whispered. "Because my father taught me that mercy is not weakness. It is the only strength that matters." He pressed the medicine stone into her palm one final time. The surface was still warm from his touch. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Ayana's breathing grew quiet, then stopped altogether. 6 months later, Sage sat in her dormitory at the Carlisle Institute. Books surrounded her like old friends. Her fingers traced the raised letters of her primer, each word a small victory over the blindness that had once defined her limitations. She had achieved everything Wheeler had promised: education, safety, a future that stretched beyond mere survival. The letter she had written lay sealed on her desk, pages documenting Ayana's innocence and Wheeler's crimes, truth transcribed in careful script, ready to seek justice for a man who had died protecting her. But through her window, she could hear the school administrator in his office below, papers rustling into his fireplace, other letters from other students carrying other truths that would never reach their intended destinations. The same government contracts that had corrupted Wheeler now funded her education. Her voice, like Ayana's father's, would be silenced by those who claimed to protect her. Around her, other students slept peacefully, grateful for their salvation from lives they had been taught to see as savage. None of them knew the price paid for their safety. Sage opened her hand. The medicine stone caught the lamplight, reflecting fragments of brightness across the dormitory walls. In one hand, she held her graduation certificate. In the other, the last gift from a man who had chosen mercy over vengeance. Two different measures of worth, two different kinds of blindness. She whispered to the stone, her voice barely audible in the darkness. "I can read now, but I'll never see home again." She placed the stone on her nightstand beside her diploma. The contrast was stark. Official recognition of her achievement. Sacred acknowledgement of her loss. The stone caught the lamplight, and for just a moment, in its reflection, Sage saw clearly. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.